Australians are really struggling with housing, paying for it in terms of the rent, securing it in a tight rental market, saving to buy it, and desperately trying to keep it with 12 interest rate rises in just over a year. And the only thing we seem to get from Labor governments, both state and federal, are promises of relatively small amounts of social housing with no real action to increase supply in the aspirational and mainstream markets. There's none of the action that's needed to curb inflation, either to give Australians back their purchasing power or to rein in the cost of building supplies. And without action on inflation from the federal government, the RBA has little left to do but keep on pulling that lever to raise interest rates. To my mind, it's appallingly irresponsible, and it really does make a mockery of the hardship that so many Australians are experiencing. But let's bring in Luke Howarth, the federal member for Petrie in the northern suburbs of Brisbane, really part of that aspirational suburban belt where there's so many people who are facing this very position, because I know he'll be able to work through some of the solutions. Luke Howarth, welcome to the program. Thanks for coming to me from Canberra. Luke, it's no exaggeration to say that there is a housing crisis. It's a housing crisis in Australia right now. It's one of supply. It's also a crisis of price. And the two are connected, of course. What are the state and federal governments proposing to try and deal with this issue?
Well, look, what they're proposing and what they're delivering are two completely different things. If we go back 14 months, the federal government, when Anthony Albanese was Prime Minister, proposed or promised a number of things. One, that life would be cheaper under him. Fail, that hasn't happened. Two, that electricity prices would be cheaper under him. And three, that he'd lower mortgages. He promised that at his 2022 Labor campaign launch. Now, on all of those three measures, clearly Anthony Albanese and the Labor government have failed miserably. So what they propose and what they deliver are two completely different things. But in saying that, look, there are a few things they're tinkering with. The state government in Queensland, for example, has a policy around granny flats, allowing them to be rented to unrelated parties, and other states are doing similar things. But in Canberra, they're also made a tinkering with an old coalition policy, the first home deposit scheme. They're enabling people not just that are buying their first home, but those have been out of the market for 10 years to access that scheme from July this year. And that will enable people with a 5% deposit to have their mortgage insurance covered. So, I mean, that's a couple of things they're doing.
What should be done, in addition to those things, to try and turn this situation around?
Well, they obviously need to do a lot more, because most of what they're proposing is all around social housing, which is publicly or state government owned housing. You've also got community housing as well. And the New South Wales government the previous New South Wales government did do a good job around community housing, but unfortunately they're not there. It's Labor wall to wall. But they do need to do a number of things. One, they need to stabilise interest rates. That's the first thing, because if interest rates are going up month after month after month, like we've seen under the Albanese government, investors and people wanting to invest in the private market, whether they're building for themselves or whether they're providing rental stock, they get spooked and exit the market. Two, state governments need to reduce crime as well, because insurance costs are pushing house insurance through the roof, and particularly business insurance, lowering inflation. And there's other policies like Peter Dutton has put out there, the Leader of the Opposition, enabling those first home buyers, those sort of 22, 23, 24-year-olds up to the mid-30s wanting to get into their own home, to be able to use some of their super that employer contributions have or employers have contributed to, enabling them to use a percentage of that for a deposit, which is a good thing, because generally they'll buy their home, be in it for 10 years, they sell it. There's normally always a capital gain in Australia in a 10-year period, and then they can return that plus a percentage of the capital gain into their super. So I think that's a winner too that Peter Dutton has proposed.
I'm really concerned that so many young Australians are having their hopes of home ownership taken away from them. And with them, let's face it, their statistical likelihood of being good, stable economic contributors, of forming families and of leaving this earth better off financially than when they arrived on it. What are your constituents, many of whom are quite young people, telling you?
Well, Amanda, people want to be able to buy a home, and, you know, parents with young adults as children, they want them to be able to buy a home as well. Unless they're able to give them some sort of deposit, it's getting more and more difficult, particularly in our capital cities. But there are opportunities for people. One, I think we need a better education around our financial literacy. A lot of people don't know what to do, for example, when interest rates are rising, whereas someone like my father always taught me when I bought a home that you need to, work out your interest rate on 10%. If you can afford it at 10%, you'll be right. But not everyone has parents and family to be able to do that.